think we just need to introduce, first of all, the four-legged friend that's in my top right corner.
Yeah, this is India. She's an English setter and she is 7 months old.
Oh, she is beautiful. And I hope she has lots of helpful things to contribute to our discussion today. You are all welcome. We may have people joining us as we continue our conversation. Hi, Steve. Hi, Corrine and Roy, and anyone else who hops on. We're looking forward to talking with you today. This discussion is our monthly drop-in discussion as part of the Europe Leaders Learning Community. There we go. I got my acronym out. And every month we invite a few people to join together and to have a discussion about our theme of the month. And our theme this month is maximizing life and ministry fruitfulness. So a great theme for this time of the year, for any time of the year, in fact. And I am joined today as part of our discussion by Carrie Webb, Richard Leakey. You can all wave, that's great. And Erin Waldron. And I wonder if you guys could just tell us where you are normally working and where you are now, and what you do in your life and ministry. Carrie.
Yeah, I'm Carrie, and normally I'm in Thessaloniki, Greece. I moved there last year. Before that, I was with YWAM Paris in Belleville for nearly 10 years. And right now I'm in Florida at my sister's house.
Very nice.
Yeah. And in Thessaloniki, I moved there last year to help pioneer member care for YWAM Greece staff. So that's what I'm busy with most of the time.
Great. And when do you hope to get back there? Do you have a time when you know you can get back?
We're having some visa challenges because of COVID. Greece withdrew the NGO visa. Mm-hmm. So I have to be out for 3 months. So I probably won't be able to go back till the end of February.
Okay. Well, Christmas in Florida, that can't be a bad thing.
Christmas in Florida. Mm-hmm. It's not too shabby. Not white, but.
Richard, you might have a white Christmas. Where are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm in Brittany, Switzerland, just outside Geneva. And yeah, we have snow on the ground, although it's raining. So it was, but it might not be by the time Christmas comes around at our altitude. But it's certainly behind us on the hills it is.
Nice.
And with my wife and a friend, we're a trio leading the base in Brittany. Re-pioneering the training centre, I think is how we're describing it. After sort of 10 years of ups and downs as a community. But really what I'm passionate about is agriculture in Africa. So in the context of fruitfulness, it's managing, leading a base and squeezing in trips to tiny villages in the middle of nowhere, training people to feed their families better. So super busy, lots going on. Dad of 3 daughters, the oldest of whom got married at the end of October. So a few weeks.
Wow. Well, I'm sure there's lots you could share about fruitfulness from various perspectives. And Erin, tell us where you are and what your focus is.
I'm in the west of Ireland, and with my husband, we focus mostly on pastoral care. And right now, for me, mostly that takes the form of spiritual direction. Especially with COVID and all the rest, it's wonderful to be able to do that online. So reaching and connecting with people around the world, like so many of you. And we have one son. He's 4 years old already.
How did that happen?
In a blink. Oh.
So as we get to this topic of maximizing life and ministry fruitfulness, I would love to hear from you guys. What comes to mind when you think about fruitfulness? I think often we can think productivity, that takes us down the line of thinking sort of activity, but when you came to this topic and started to look on the Europe Leaders Learning Community website, what was in your mind as you thought about fruitfulness? Richard, maybe as our agriculture guy, you can jump in here.
Great. You know, it's really interesting that we'll get to talking about evaluation because it's so important, but that is not at all where my mind went to when I heard the subject. My mind went to doing the next thing that Jesus asked you to do. And I think as a community, in my experience of YWAM has been in the same location, but we've gone through ups and downs. So fruitfulness in some seasons has looked like loads of students. But then there've been seasons where we've been really pruned, or there's been like kind of quite sudden leadership transition and loads of people have left. And so then fruitfulness could no longer be measured in, you know, numbers of schools we ran because all the school leaders left. So then it became a process of really going, okay, yeah, but what does that mean to be fruitful in winter? And a sense of, you know, being pruned, cutting back, preparing for the next season, but at the same time, like not just hibernating either. And I think in discussions with Lynn Green at a training I was in, he talked about surrender, and that actually it all revolves around doing the next thing that Jesus asked you to do. That's the measure. Otherwise, we get super caught up in student numbers and recruitment and all that kind of stuff, which is really important. Like the kingdom is made up of that stuff. Because there is multiplication, there is fruit, but then if I base my worth there and not just on that simple obedience, I get super stressed out. Certainly for me, then that work-life balance, which again is a weird concept, just disappears because I got to do more.
All right.
And then I lose my wife, my 3 daughters, so that doesn't work out.
So listening to you, one of the questions that comes to my mind, and maybe Erin or Carrie, you want to jump in here, is fruitfulness something we decide what it's going to look like ahead of time? So we envision something, and I don't know if you watched the LDX talk. Oh no, it was the Leadership Lounge with Andreas, talking about, you know, planning for fruitfulness, envisioning that together and then moving towards it. Is that something that we decide ahead of time, or is it something that we only kind of see retrospectively, and, you know, we don't really know what the season's going to look like before we're in it? What do you guys think?
I think there's a way to, I mean, I think it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about a ministry, there is a way to plan for fruitfulness, or like the structure of a team, there is a way to plan for fruitfulness, for that team to grow, to build a structure that can grow. Yeah, but I think maybe personal fruitfulness may be harder to define if we're defining fruitfulness as effectiveness and resilience and longevity in the field.
I was smiling, Miranda, because I was thinking of that very question. Like, although we hold our goals, and I think it's such an important process to walk through that, the goal making, and I know we'll get more to evaluation, etc. But one of the things that was coming to my mind was how the fruit might actually look very different than how we envision it. And so, you know, there's always that also holding hands, which really comes back to what Richard was saying about the surrender, you know, that we're just open to how God will even use our goals and transform our goals into the fruit that he desires to actually be the outcome.
Yeah, so sometimes what we've expected or envisioned, if you like, is not necessarily where the real fruitfulness is, but something else is what God has been about in that season. So are you jumping in there, Richard?
Yeah, because I'm just, when you said season like that, it got me thinking of somebody like, say, David in the Bible. So God goes, you're going to be king. And I think if you draw a straight line there, you spent a lot of years going, what a total failure. But when you take that step back and go, okay, here's the preparation, here's the stuff in his character that needed to get worked out so he could actually be a king. Because if you put him with all that authority and the character he has sort of mid-story where faking insanity seems like a good idea, where, you know, somebody insults me, so I'm just going to go murder him. And then Abigail intervenes, doesn't she? That if you put him with, surrounded by a kingdom of yes men, it would have been disastrous. And so I think sometimes God gives us an out there picture and then takes us on steps, and the fruitfulness of that season, you know, be the best harp player you can be in the court of the king, who you kind of been told you're going to replace, but play the harp really, really well. I think there's a tension, isn't there? Because eventually, if God's given us a thing and we never get there, a vision and we never get there, then that's a problem. And I think if I think of a community similar, but at the same time, we can't miss that character development that might be the main fruit of the season that we're in.
Yeah, so that's interesting. As I'm listening to you guys, what I'm hearing is that there's work that's being done on multiple levels at the same time. So there's maybe the role of the imagination and the cognition, sort of dreaming our way into the future and making plans to get there. And we're setting our face towards fruitfulness, if you like. But then there's also all of the heart stuff, the relational stuff, the character stuff that's happening, that is forming us into people who can bear fruit in season and out of season. So I don't know if there's anything that comes to your mind or resonates with you as I say those things, or an experience in your own life that you're reminded of that you want to add to the discussion.
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much, but the thought that comes to mind, I think, is my journey towards doing agriculture in Africa. I wasn't in YWAM the first time I went to Africa, and I came back as a 16-year-old convinced I was going to be a missionary. I needed to stop everything and go. Fortunately, my church elders kind of held me a little, and I ended up with a call to agriculture in Africa. Long, sinuous journey, but ended up in YWAM as a 24-year-old, knowing I was called, but then didn't really start doing agriculture in Africa until I was 38. So 21 years later. And I think that's been a mercy of God for me, but also for the communities that I've been to, in terms of too many answers and didn't know how to listen very well. And a lot of pride. I think God needed to break that out of me little by little, and that was a long journey. When I look now at some of the opportunities that are opening up and some of the communities that we're working with, it's kind of like really humbling. We translated material here into French, and it's now being used in sort of 9-10 countries by a bunch of different non-YWAM people. True multiplication, like we're not doing anything. What happened around us was we translated the material into French so it can be used in West Africa, and it's just sort of growing. Zero contact with it. It's just happening out there. So it's that thing of, for me, as God worked my character stuff and broke me, I feel like then he could start to use me. Then he's like, oh, okay, it's not about you. Right, now you can come and work for me. Whereas I think the danger of having an overly strong vision focus is we get overly impressed by ourselves or the ministry we work with instead of by Jesus, because it's not about building YWAM Burtony or YWAM anywhere. and it's good, you know, we want to do an annual assessment and have annual reports and go, wow, this year isn't amazing. But 100 years from now, we're totally irrelevant. Kingdom keeps growing. So how there's a very both and thought that it's got to look very like character broken and humble, so that we're ready to be used by God wherever he positions us.
Yeah, so that what you're reminding me of course, is that, you know, in the quiet seasons when it looks as though nothing is happening and there is no fruit, God is at work. And you're also reminding me of that part of the Leadership Lounge conversation with Andreas, where Johnny was talking about what drives us in our desire for fruitfulness. And of course, it can be wonderful motivations to build the kingdom. And there can also be that piece of ego that's in there, that, you know, we want to do something that makes us feel accomplished or whatever it is. So how do we balance these the doing part of ministry with the growing internal work that God is about? Because in his you know, in his hugeness, he's able to move both forward at the same time. It's not like, you know, God says, okay, you know, we're not going to do some of this because we need to do this. He's able to do both at the same time. But how do you see that working out in your own life, in the teams that you've been part of?
I think what Richard was sharing is goes in line with this question of how we do the journey to what God has called us is just as important as actually getting there. And I think making space to stop and take stock of what we're doing, what we're busy investing in, and how we are as we're doing it. You know, I think it's a really common story that people find themselves with responsibilities that are the results of other people's choices, and there's resentment building up in what they're having to carry because they're sacrificing their own call. And stopping it to debrief and to see what needs to be pruned, what needs to be let go of, really can help in the long run create effectiveness and fruitfulness for them. For us, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just remember for us in Paris, one challenging year, we just stopped everything for a month, and God just took us on a journey of discovering a deeper understanding of holiness, and it really saved us it really like helped us go through so many other crises and storms that happened. And that month of focusing on holiness, people from my team, we still talk about that, how that really impacted us. And on the outside, it was like, you know, we were sitting ducks, but on the inside, it was a profound time. And it really did help stabilize us.
And presumably you moved forward in a different kind of way afterwards.
Oh yeah, we did. Yes. It completely restructured and realigned us as a team. This was back in 2015. And it helped us weather some pretty intense storms the following year. As well as, you know, that was the year of the terrorist attacks in Paris, so that was pretty intense. Yeah. So I want to come back to debriefing, but Erin, I just wonder if you want to jump in at all on this question of the tension, if you like, or the sort of dual nature of fruitfulness being both internal and external.
Yeah, so much comes to mind, so it's hard to kind of narrow it down. Because I just love what you guys are already saying. You know, I was thinking of the image of a book. You know, here's my journal. The lines aren't to the very edge of the page. There's a little bit of space, and it's that same thing for us. You know, we always need a bit of margin in our lives. And I was thinking of how, on the one hand, the question is very challenging because it's so individual. Depending on the season, the environment we're in, so many factors. But ultimately, it comes down to obedience. In times when God's given me incredibly high capacity, that balance has looked very different to now, where actually I find my capacity is quite low. And so I'm just aware of just walking in the obedience, the daily obedience with God to hold that balance. And just even as I was reflecting on this topic, I was thinking about the hospitality of God and how so much of it for me comes down to that. How am I being hospitable to God? How am I receiving his invitation to me? And if I'm attuned to that in the everyday, then the answers become quite clear as we follow the ancient path. We walk in it, we rest in it. So it's no one hard, fast answer. It's going to be different for every one of us.
Yeah.
But yeah, that obedience and hospitality.
And that requires a good level of awareness of God, right? Communication with him, and awareness of ourselves. Like Carrie was saying, not just the what of what we're doing, but how we're doing it and how we are in the midst of it. So for you guys, what are some practices that you incorporate into your life on a maybe some semi-regular basis that helps you to be aware? And so we might talk about evaluation, if you like, but that takes lots of different forms. So what does that look like for you guys? What has your experience been of that?
I maybe jump in. That's a dog shaking itself in the background, sorry. I think as we were talking, a thought came to me. We talked about sort of self-awareness, and I realized part of my sort of regular quiet time practice is to sort of just pause and go, okay, where am I at emotionally and spiritually, and like a self-evaluation. I suppose I could try and push it and say, oh yeah, I debrief regularly, but I'm not sure I'm that intentional, but just sitting with a journal and a pen and going, okay, what's going on and where am I? And the more intense the season is, the more I'm quite emotional. Everything is emotional in my life. With all those books that talk about how women are and men are, I'm on the wrong side of the line. Like I have spaghetti instead of containers, all that, whatever. Teach marriage stuff with Elaine, and she's like the one with everything in boxes, and I'm balls of spaghetti in my emotions. But the more intense it is, the more I've learned that I need to sit down and pull some of those strings out and name them and examine them and just hold them before the Lord and go, okay, am I doing the right things? Am I in the right places? So like kind of self-taught personal debrief on a fairly regular basis. I mean, most weeks that's something I'll sit down and do. And if it's super intense, there are seasons when it's been almost every day I've sat down and pulled out my emotions and looked at them. So that examine practice of asking the questions through the day, which is more kind of early church fathers stuff, is helpful, but a little too rigid for me. But yeah, journaling. And the more the intense it is, making time for that almost on a daily basis. And an easy season where I've got space, I don't need it because those thoughts and emotions come to the surface. That connection with the Lord is easier. But if I'm getting up and driving into the day and finishing late and falling into bed, then I need to discipline myself and evaluate the day in some ways, or the week.
Yeah, that's helpful, Richard, and very similar to what Andreas was saying in the Leadership Lounge with regards to his own practices of journaling, checking in with himself in that way. And so it sounds as if what you're getting at there is that it's important to name things, to take time to become aware of what's going on, and then to put names to it, like you were saying, pulling out the threads. Did you want to add something to that? You look like
no,
you do.
I think that's a really good description. And I think there was a season, so my dad's passed away now, but he had Alzheimer's. And for 5 years, we lost him gradually. And that sort of filled up almost 90% of my emotional space. So I found myself incredibly reactive. I think, though I have to speak to my wife and kids, because obviously they got the emotion, but feeling like tiny things were incredibly overwhelming. But anytime I sat down and went, okay, what is actually going on? I'm like, oh yeah, my dad's dying. Oh, okay. Then there's all this emotion. So anytime where I find myself in quite a reactive space, being able to understand that often what I'm really emotional about actually isn't really what's going on. So I'm super upset that I don't know, such a body turned up late for worship, community worship this morning, and that's incredibly frustrating. Actually, it's nothing to do with that. We hold as a leader and actually put the emotions in the right place and manage then myself and the situations I'm in a much more appropriate way, because I can go, okay, yeah, that emotion actually doesn't belong in this situation. It's real for what I'm walking through in this season, but it's not in the room right now.
Yeah, and all of that plays into our capacities, doesn't it? Like Erin mentioned the word capacity, and therefore our fruitfulness as we offer what we have to the world, sort of thing. Carrie, I wonder what have you seen in your experience of debriefing? I know you're a trained debriefer and you've been doing quite a lot during the pandemic.
Yeah.
What have you seen in terms of this importance of naming things so that people can be who they are in the world in a way that is fruitful and good, brings goodness?
Yeah, I think one thing that I really appreciated Andreas mentioned was talking about our losses. And I think the debrief allows a really safe space to really talk about what has been lost and what has failed maybe, or seemed like failure. So naming things helps us observe our griefs. And the only way we can process grief is by actually acknowledging that we are grieving and observing the grief. And I think that's been a really prominent thing in the debriefs that I've done this year, is helping people acknowledge and name their grief, because as much as we love this life that we live in YWAM and the everything that we get to do, there is a lot of sacrifice and there is a lot of loss. And so I think that's been one of the most powerful things, is naming the grief and then inviting Jesus into that pain and letting him be our pain bearer with us. I think that acknowledging, I think a lot of burnout that I've seen in YWAMers is actually unprocessed grief from years and years of just we don't cultivate taking time for personal debriefs. We do organizational debriefs often, and it's fantastic, but there is a need for a personal debrief to help us remain effective in the long run and resilient. It helps cultivate that resiliency.
Yeah. And so how would you connect what's happening in a debrief to a person or a team then going into the next season in a way that they're positioned to be more fruitful?
Yeah, I think it's like what Ali Swan.
Yes. Yes. So
her video was really like really practical and informative of that image of unloading your backpack, and so that when you go to the next thing, you're only carrying what you need to carry. You're only continuing to carry those things that are actually necessary, and it creates more space for fruitfulness. It creates more space for the ability to do more, to increase your capacity.
To give yourself to your next thing that we sort of talked about, the next thing that God's inviting us to.
Yeah, we can only carry so much, and I think that really does help us identify what we're ready to leave behind, what we're ready to put at the cross, what we're ready to move on from.
So one of the things that I was kind of wrestling with, and I think it's connected a bit here, maybe Erin, you can speak to this, I'm not sure, but is, you know, in scripture we read two things which seem as if there may be a little bit in tension with one another. You know, on the one hand, Jesus says, I've come that you might have life in abundance, life in all its fullness. That sounds like what we're talking about here, you know, maximizing fruitfulness. I've come that you have this abundant life. And then he also says, you know, real love is laying your life down. And if you want to follow me, take up your cross. How do you see these two invitations from God in relation to what we're talking about here, life and ministry fruitfulness? I mean, I don't want to kind of dump you in it, Erin, but I wonder if anything comes to mind as I share those thoughts, or any of you.
I don't want to dump you in it, Erin, but I'm going to.
Yeah.
So, under the bus.
No pressure.
I mean, I'm not looking for a sermonette or anything. I'm just wondering, how do we live in the tension of this invitation to lay our lives down, but also to live an abundant life? And the losses and griefs that, Carrie, you're talking about seem part of the laying our life down. Not that we do that without processing what it is that's happening, but we willingly lay our lives down. We do surrender. There is loss involved in this life to which we're called, invited. At the same time, you know, there's a promise or a hope or a vision of fullness and abundance. And Richard really wants to say something.
Only that if Erin sounds muffled, it's just she's under
under the bus.
Oh yeah, the great tension. As you say that, actually, I was reminded of a prayer of Oswald Chambers. Came to mind as I was thinking about this topic, and it says this. It's really a question, but I'd say it's a prayer. Will I surrender to Jesus, placing no conditions whatsoever as to how the brokenness will come? Will I surrender to Jesus Christ, placing no conditions whatsoever as to how the brokenness will come? So I'm just thinking, you know, the greatest freedom is knowing love in Christ. And so if we're in that place, even if it's in our place of brokenness, then there is that promise of life abundant and of hope, you know, all the fruits of the Holy Spirit, of joy, of peace, even in brokenness. Yeah. You know, since we're thinking fruit and gardening and agriculture, you know, just even the thought of erosion and you know, how actually in the stripping away, things can be revealed within us that will then produce greater life later on. Here in Ireland, we had an incredibly hot summer a couple of years ago, very unusual for here, but an amazing thing happened that because the grass died away in a way that doesn't normally happen, from aerial footage, archaeologists were able to see things under the ground as a result of this drought that would never have normally been revealed because of all the grass and you know, the thickness. It's just such a striking picture to me of what happens sometimes in our own lives, whether it's erosion or drought, that feeling of exile or wilderness, whatever language we want to use for it, that actually there's incredible life that is revealed underneath, and there is newness that is revealed, new life and abundance, new starts. Yeah, could go on. I'll pause there.
So what would you say, any of you, to someone who you can see would really benefit from facing some of the difficult things, maybe having a personal debrief or seeing a spiritual director, but they know they're going to have to look at some things that are really hard and they don't really want to do it, so they keep, you know, putting it off. You want to slap them? Is that what you want to do? What's a more invitational thing we might say to them?
Yeah, the slap is a little bit further down the road, isn't it? I think just telling stories has been really helpful. We've tried to build a culture on the base where we invite people into the deep work. And I think as the kind of leadership grouping on the base, if I think round us, I think there's probably 8 or 9 of us who are like the core, like senior leaders on the base. And I would say 6 or 7 of us at any one time are doing some kind of deep work. So it suggests that there are moments where you shift, but it's a lifestyle of pursuing that depth. So I think modeling it and then inviting people into it and telling stories of the freedom that it brings. So, you know, it was for freedom that Christ set us free, like the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace. If God wants something from your life and it's going to hurt, it's because he's inviting you to love, joy, peace, inviting you to more freedom. So we try and build that story around our community where that's the, okay, you might need to go see a psychologist, you might need counseling, you might need a debrief, you might want to push from like one-on-one a week to a couple. But the goal would be joy, freedom, peace. You know that you're loved. Trying to build a conversation in the community that people look at that and go, oh yeah, okay, you did that counseling season, but there's way more freedom for you. So I was sitting yesterday with one of our staff who's potentially transitioning out, and I just said to her, you know, step back. You feel like you need to take a break and rest, but step back. 2 years ago, where were you? You're a totally different person. And God has been so incredibly faithful in a painful season. And then if they don't, slap them.
So it sounds like sort of normalizing the debriefing evaluation process can be helpful. Is that something that the rest of you would say also? What's your experience in?
I would also say we need to have trust built up. And I think Richard was hitting that too, without saying the word, he was dancing around it. But trust, so our staff can come to leaders and say, actually, I'm really struggling, and they're not going to be, punished or pushed to the side because we're trying to get this vision accomplished. And so I think staff that feel like they can actually say, I'm not coping with this. I'm not coping well. And they need to trust the leader that they'll be heard and that there will be help.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was touched on. I can't remember which resource it was where this was mentioned, but the fact that we can often be afraid of, I think it might have been Belinda who's on the call. We can be afraid of having an evaluation because we think that maybe the intention of the evaluation is to bring judgment, or that somehow we're missing the mark if we're not doing well. And speaking for myself, I think that's definitely something that I've experienced in my life in ministry, has been, if I'm not doing well and it doesn't look as if I can perform in the way that is expected or I expect, somehow I get pushed to the back of the queue or something. So I better make it look like I'm doing well. And maybe having an evaluation or facing the difficult things that are going on in life, is not an attractive option when we are sort of seeing things in that way. Carrie and Erin, you both see people who are struggling. How is it that people just wait until they're really doing badly and then they go for a debrief or see a spiritual director? I mean, how do you create a more positive sort of scenario there for people?
Yeah, I've had both. Where there's some people who just connect in the crisis, and then others who have that pattern of just that ongoing personal debrief. Just looking at the original question there, the emotional, when people don't have the emotional energy to go through it. I was just thinking as well about how we also need to honor that person with space. Just even back in the day when I was a clinical counselor, there was no way that I had mandated clients because of the scenarios, kids at risk and whatnot, and in very difficult family circumstances. And the kids could be there with me, but I can't make them talk.
Yeah.
And I do my part to show up. They have to do their part to show up, by court mandate. But they don't have to actually show up. They can be in body, but and those are extreme situations. But that happens to all of us in different ways at different times too. If we hit crises, there are times when we just need space, and I think it's important to honor that. Whether it's a fight with God, almost like they need to actually be able to hold that anger before God and just be angry. It's okay to live in that space. And but then of course you don't want to stay there, and God never leaves us there. So it's that gentle honoring, giving space, walking alongside, I'd say was huge. Just the times, thinking of one person that the crisis person, and just coming alongside and listening is often just what that person needs. And then there are seasons that she moves through, and that's okay, but it's working at her pace, so it's not me pushing. And then when there have been breakthroughs, then she owns it. So it's a totally different process. So I love if we can create the culture, amazing. But for those who don't have that personal culture of it, we need to honor where they're at.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
I would also say again, like normalizing debrief I think goes a long way, and modeling it ourselves, actually taking time ourselves to do debrief.
Yeah.
And I've worked a lot with people who have abuse in their backgrounds, and sometimes it's easy to compare people with their hurts and say, why are you struggling? Because look what this person has gone through. But I think acknowledging that hard is hard. If it's hard for someone, it's hard for them. And acknowledging that it's a really brave thing to face our own pain, to face our own. And I think that really encouraging people in that way of just acknowledging that, yeah, this is a hard journey to face this, and it's very brave, and they don't have to do it alone, I think can go a long way.
So listening to you guys, it sounds as though a debrief or an evaluation is for when things get bad, that's when we do a debrief. But I wonder if maybe there's a place for debriefing and evaluation when things are doing well, maybe just as a sort of a routine readjustment, so that we're putting our energies into what we want to see grow. Richard, have you got any thoughts about that? You look like you might. Yeah, good.
I like that I'm so extroverted that across the screen,
it's amazing.
You can feel it. I can't help it. It's like, hit me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. We're again trying to build rhythm. So when we finish a program, when we finish a seminar, we did a B2B with Steve, who's on the call with us. We did a student debrief at the end of that and a staff debrief. And I think there's all kinds of different ways we can use. I just like the W's, which is what went well and how can we keep it, and what went wrong, how can we fix it? Rather than it being a crisis debrief, it's just a rhythm of, hey, how was that and how could we make it better?
Yeah.
And, you know, most of the time, I think one of the things that we are bad at seeing is how well things are going and what a gift we are to the people around us. So often if I'm sitting leading like those kind of low-key debriefs, I'll just push and push and push for people to go, okay, what was successful? What worked? What are you pleased with? Where did you see God move? Because we shift so quickly to the, and we need to improve this, and we miss celebration aspect. So for instance, the B2B we ran this summer, our staff debrief was around a breakfast. And we brought like Thanksgiving flowers to the foot of the cross, things that we were thankful to God for, but it created an atmosphere of celebration and positivity. And we did some thanking other people for where we'd seen them be a blessing during the week. Rhythms like that, where we focus on where the life is, are really good. And we want to assess, look, how do we prep for more and work? But we live in a world, and certainly in our area of Europe, where we moan and complain and everything is terrible, and just trying to be walking in the opposite spirit to that is super life-giving. And I think often when we've run a school or a seminar or a program, we've been super busy. And so, you know, we're running together. It's super difficult while we're running to really affirm, because you're struggling for breath while you're running hard. But then when the race is done, just stopping and going, wow, that was amazing. The way you did that or this or the other, I think is just so important. I think often we can fine tune things while we're moving as we finish a season, rather than waiting till, oh, that engine seems to be broken. If we'd done an oil change every 7,000 kilometers instead of waiting till the engine's seized up and we're in crisis.
Yeah, that's a good picture. And it sounds as though as we name those things that have been fruitful and that are going well, our tendency will be to do more of that, to direct ourselves towards those things where the life is. So that, I imagine that has a good impact on our fruitfulness.
Yeah, and I think my experience of working with like 20-something leaders is, and if I think of my own season, like in my 20s, I didn't know what I was good at, and I was discovering myself. And having senior leaders around me, and now being that senior leader, which is a scary thing to admit. My staff are kind of the same age as my kids now. But seeing how life-giving that is, just to say to someone, wow, that was amazing. When you do that, the room lights up around you. Wow, just wow.
Yes.
And watching people just go, oh, thank you so much.
Yes.
Just beautiful.
And then they do more of that, and then there's more fruit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, we need to work on what isn't working, but only to get it out of the way so the image piece that we carry shines.
Yeah.
And I think the world wants us to spend a lot of time working on the things that don't work, which is important, right? But I think the image bearer pieces and knowing where I shine, where I really reflect God well, helping people discover those and see those and shine is a super important piece of that. What I want to call like routine debrief and evaluation, instead of waiting until I'm like up against the wall and everything's terrible.
Yeah, that's good.
One of the really fun ways that we just carry debrief in our mini evaluations, examines really in our family. And part of our rhythm is we have pizza picnics on Friday nights. So we make our pizza, you know, my son helps me with the dough, and he's good at rolling it out and all that good stuff. So it's one of our fun little traditions. But while we're having that meal in front of the fire, and I'll just kneel down on the floor, we just take a little look over our week, and we talk about, our highlights and some of the challenges, and, well, yeah, there was an area that I could grow, like, so it's just a fun and really casual way that we actually just carry on that culture. But then it also brings out the celebrations too. And it's often the case of, oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that little piece, and that was really great. And so it's highlighting some of those fun little things too in every day.
Yeah, that's good, Erin. It's making me think how, the things we do in our smallest circle, either as an individual or with our housemate or with our family, those things can be amplified into our communities, rhythms of noticing and celebration and evaluation or examine. So all of that sounds very doable. I don't know, does that sound doable to you guys?
It makes me think that I could eat a pizza right now.
It's not Friday, you have to wait.
Good point.
Well,
sorry, you actually asked a serious question. Yeah, I think so. I think that evaluation, preparing for fruitfulness thing, but I think with so much in the way God works is there has to be an internal practice or a personal practice that overflows outwards to the family, to the community. And we have families that are strong units or kind of house shares like that, or individuals that are building those practices and overflowing that into the community. It's so much richer. If it only starts out there, it's false. And then I think it does, oh my goodness, I'm going to be evaluated. But if I'm regularly, we as individuals or units in the community are regularly going, okay, where am I at? What's going on this week? When we do that corporately, it feels way less threatening. And I think creates healthier rhythms, because as a leader, in some ways, I can be the least equipped person to see what's going on in the community. Because everything's coming full on, and actually people on the edge of the community often have a way more perceptive view of
might be noticing different things. Yeah.
So I need a community that's kind of evaluating us and themselves.
And I think it is really, I really like how you said it, Erin, mini evaluations. I think that's a good way to say it, because I think it can be really organic at the end of every season, just to see what happened, what went well, what didn't. It just takes a little bit of intentionality, and it's very doable.
It's reminded me of what Andreas said about spiritual indifference, and I wasn't sure if that would be something that everyone kind of understood in the same sort of a way, but I think what he was trying to get at was this this ability to not be overly touched by things, as it were, because we know that we're grounded in our relationship with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and we know what we have been asked to do, what our next thing is, and so it seems as though that would be a really helpful posture as we enter into evaluation in particular. It doesn't say anything about me if something isn't working. It doesn't say anything about the apple tree if this particular branch gets pruned. We're all about the growth and the fruitfulness of the overall tree. So I don't know, does that seem like it's connected in with the capacity or willingness to enter into evaluation, that we might also feel this same sense of what he called spiritual indifference?
I think it does kind of just, it's funny, I never heard it said like that, but I think he's onto something, because it's just about that investing in the things that God's actually called you to invest in. That there's a lot of going on, and there's a lot of people with a lot of different callings. We are a body, and each part has its own responsibility. So it's kind of like evaluation gives you a chance to see where you may have picked up things that weren't your responsibility, that it wasn't what God was actually calling you to pick up. And to be able to lay it down, trusting that God's going to take care of that. Someone else is going to answer that call with wisdom and with that. I also really liked when he said that leadership transition takes longer than you think. And so if you are transitioning out of something, you do it with wisdom. You don't just drop and run.
Yeah, which takes us back to the seasons that we started out with, and how fruitfulness looks different in different seasons. Back in the month when our theme was pruning, also Belinda, she comes up with some wise things, Belinda. She was talking about, when you're in a place and you don't actually see any fruit for a long time, and how important, now I'm connecting our two themes now, but how important evaluating is in that kind of a season, so that you keep on checking in. Is this still where I'm supposed to be? Is this still what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I still to be pouring myself into this? And trust that, God's the one who brings the increase. We practice obedience, as we said at the beginning. So seasons of fruitfulness.
And I think, I'm not sure how to put words to this. It's dangerous when you're an extrovert, because you have a thought and you don't actually know what you're about to say. So we're called to work hard, right? So there's a sense of, that whole biblical theme around laziness and slothful and all that kind of stuff. But in some ways, the fruitfulness is almost unconnected to how hard I'm working. So think the multiplication, like loaves and fish, 5,000 people. The kid had to turn up and give everything he had to give. But it's so exponentially more the fruitfulness that God's going for, that it's the initial part is not relevant almost. Don't hear me say that we don't need to work hard and strive and push and intercede. All those things are super important, of course. But fruitfulness is in some ways humblingly removed from what we bring to the story. Because it isn't about me. It's about him. And I'm tiny in a really beautiful, beautiful way. So, sometimes we get so self-obsessed in a Western culture. Post-Christian Western culture is literally all about me. And the kingdom story, I am deeply loved, but it's not about me. And so, I think there's just a deep brokenness in my walk with God in this area of fruitfulness, in terms of it's just, I'll do the next thing you ask me to do. What a privilege to be used to see something happen, but it isn't the Richard Leakey show. It's Jesus show, the Holy Spirit show. When I see him move, and if at the end of the story someone goes, "Oh wow, YWAM Burton is amazing," I'm like, we've missed it and you've missed it, because it's about him. So we got to hold that, and I think it frees me, at least, from so much expectation. I'm just doing the next thing God asked me to do. I can do that. I bring picnics. That's my job. That's all I've got to do today. Bring a picnic. I can do that. I can make sandwiches and go fish. And sometimes the picnic is stale bread and smoked fish, but I brought it. And so there's that piece in this conversation that we need to hold as well. Which certainly for me, re-pioneering is wonderfully freeing, because it's like I gave everything I had today. There was nothing left. Like by the end of the day, I will be done. And it's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. we are going over our hour, so I do want to draw us to a close. And that is a good place to close, that it's all about him. I feel like there's so much more we could say in terms of, you know, what is fruitfulness, maybe kind of a theology of partnering with the Lord in what he's about in the world, you know, what it means to have a vision of the kingdom, into which we're sort of pouring our lives, giving our lives. So there's so much more to this. And it's interesting because we kind of started with some pretty simple thoughts about evaluation and debriefing, which are all a good part of this picture. So what I'm hoping is that for all of us, and for maybe others who might watch this recording, that we leave with a sense of invitation to wrestle a little bit with what fruitfulness looks like for us in the season that we're in, and even to ask ourselves, what is needed for me currently in order for me to know that I am I'm putting my energy into the thing that God has asked me to. Yeah, so may there be some personal and even team reflection that comes out of this time. A reminder to all of us that there are some great resources on the website, which is europellc.eu. And if you go to /resource, you'll find an evaluation tool there that's really helpful. You'll also find on the website a directory of people who are trained debriefers. Hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll get some spiritual directors on there too, so that people can access that. You want one, Richard?
Erin is below me on the screen, so
right. Erin's not below you on my screen.
Oh.
I can do this because Miranda is as well.
So all that to say, if you're looking for help, if you're looking for tools and for people to get alongside you as you seek to be more fruitful in your life and ministry, then the Europe LLC website is a good place to start. Thanks everyone for your contributions. Really great to be chatting with you today, and look forward to connecting with you next time.